The sun hung low over Charleston Memorial, casting golden threads of late afternoon light across the glass-paneled lobby, where nurses and scrubs moved with that strange rhythm known only to those who live inside hospitals. A rhythm of urgency softened by compassion, of lives intertwined with charts and beeping monitors. Amid the quiet flurry of clipboards and soft footsteps, one figure moved with particular grace, as though she carried not just knowledge but gentleness in her very posture. Her name was Danielle Ayres, and for the past 12 years, she had walked these halls not as someone merely employed to heal, but as someone deeply called to do so. She had seen lives begin and lives end, had held hands in silence and wiped tears without needing words. And though her uniform was the same pale blue as every other nurse's, her presence felt different, steady, grounded, quietly radiant. That afternoon, her shift was just ending when she made one final round to room 317. It was a habit now, even though it technically wasn't her assigned room anymore. But she still stopped by just for a moment to check on Mr. Andrew Whitmore, her former patient, whose recovery had been nothing short of astonishing. He had arrived 6 months ago in a state that left most of the staff uncertain whether he would walk again, let alone speak with clarity. A car accident on a fog-drenched interstate had nearly stolen everything: mobility, speech, memory. But through weeks of painstaking therapy and medical care, he had returned to himself, piece by piece. Danielle had been there through it all. She had been there when he first whispered her name instead of calling her nurse. She had been there when his fingers trembled but finally wrapped around a fork. And she had been there on the morning when he looked at her with a still fragile gaze and said, "I think you saved more than just my body." Now, as she gently tapped the doorframe and peeked in, Andrew was sitting upright by the window, a book resting open in his lap. The late light caught his features in a way that softened the faint scars along his temple, and his normally unruly brown hair looked nearly golden. "I thought you were off 2 hours ago," he said, a grin touching his mouth. "I was," Danielle replied, stepping in with a faint shrug. "But I had a feeling you'd still be sitting here pretending to read a book you've already finished." Andrew chuckled. "Guilty. I'm just trying to look intellectual for you. First impressions and all." "You mean 300th impressions?" she teased, taking the chair beside him. "You've had plenty of chances to impress me." "Have any of them worked?" he asked, more quietly this time. Danielle didn't answer right away. She watched the light shift on the floor, listened to the faint hum of machines behind the wall, and took a breath. "Yes," she said. "1 or 2. Silence fell between them. Not awkward, not heavy, but comfortable. Familiar. And in that quiet, a current passed between them that had grown over months of conversations, laughter, and shared silence. A connection formed not out of fantasy or whirlwind romance, but out of small moments repeated until they turned into something solid, something real. "I've been thinking," Andrew began, his voice more tentative now. "I know it's a bit soon, and maybe it's crazy, but when I was in that hospital bed, half out of my mind, I kept hearing your voice. Not the doctor's, not my brother's, not my friend's. Just yours, like it was anchoring me to this world. And now that I'm almost whole again, I don't want to pretend I didn't feel what I felt." Danielle turned to him, meeting his gaze. "Andrew, I want to take you out," he said, gently but directly. "Not coffee in the cafeteria. A real date. Somewhere you don't wear a badge or carry a stethoscope." She laughed softly, surprised by the boldness but touched by the sincerity. "You know how complicated that is, right? It's not just about us. I was your nurse. You were my friend before you were anything else," he said. "And you were the one person who never made me feel like a broken thing that needed fixing." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Let me think about it." Andrew nodded. "That's fair." It wasn't until she got home that night, her apartment quiet, her shoes kicked off near the door, and her tea steeping on the counter, that she let herself sit with the possibility. Danielle had been careful all her life. She had built her career with steadiness, avoided complications, never blurred the lines between professional and personal. But what she felt for Andrew had never been about stepping over lines. It had been about how two people find each other through slow understanding and earned trust. She thought of the way he looked at her, never with pity, never with expectation. She thought of the letters he started writing as part of his therapy, long pages he would read to her during rehab, some filled with laughter, some heavy with reflection. And she thought of how he made her feel like a person before anything else. Not just a caregiver, not just a woman in scrubs. When she returned to the hospital the next morning, she walked directly to room 317 and stood in the doorway. "I'd like that dinner," she said. The weeks that followed unfolded in quiet wonder. They dined at a small waterfront restaurant with paper tablecloths and live jazz. They walked through the city after dark, sharing memories like old coins pulled from their pockets. She told him about her father, a preacher who believed grace was found in how we treat people when no one's watching. He told her about the weight of wealth, how growing up in a prominent family had often meant pretending, performing. By the time Andrew's discharge came, he had moved from crutches to a cane, and from uncertainty to confidence. And Danielle, usually guarded, found herself looking forward to each message, each hour spent beside him. What she didn't expect, however, was the letter. It arrived in a manila envelope, delivered to her at the nurse's station with no return address. Inside was a single typed sheet. MS. Heirs, we understand you have become close with our son, Andrew Whitmore. While we appreciate your care during his recovery, we must strongly insist that you refrain from pursuing a relationship that would not only be inappropriate, but damaging to his well-being and our family's reputation. This is not a request. The Whitmore family. She read it 3 times. Her hands trembled only slightly. She placed the letter back into the envelope, folded it neatly, and walked away. The following morning brought with it a soft drizzle that blurred the windows of Charleston Memorial, casting the entire ward in a watery silver light. Outside, leaves swayed gently, half wet and heavy, and the sidewalks were streaked with faint reflections of passing headlights. Inside, however, the hospital bustled on as usual. Alarms pinging, elevators humming, nurses exchanging reports with clipped urgency and sleep-lined eyes. But Danielle Ayres moved more slowly that morning. The envelope was still in her bag, unopened since the night before when she'd folded the letter carefully, placed it beneath her journal, and sat in a long silence in the corner of her apartment. She hadn't cried. She hadn't raged. Instead, she had traced the name Whitmore again and again with her eyes, not out of shock, but out of something colder, older, something that felt like déjà vu. It wasn't the first time she'd been told she didn't belong somewhere. Not the first time someone with old money and old names tried to silence something real with carefully coded threats. But this time she wasn't just protecting herself. She stepped off the elevator on the 3rd floor, walking the familiar path to room 317, now officially discharged and marked as vacant. But she knew where Andrew would be. Downstairs in the outpatient therapy wing, working on his final strength routines before fully transitioning home. She found him in the gym, dressed in athletic sweats, laughing lightly with one of the therapists as he adjusted his brace and reached for a resistance band. He looked up and grinned when he saw her, but his smile faltered the moment their eyes locked. Something in her expression, firm, unreadable, reached him before she even spoke. "Danielle?" he asked, standing straighter. "Can we talk?" she said, glancing toward the hallway. He nodded quickly, excused himself, and followed her into the consultation alcove, away from the stretch bands and rehab bikes, away from the curious looks of staff who had grown used to seeing them together. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice soft but alert. "Something's happened." Danielle pulled the envelope from her bag without ceremony and handed it to him. "This was delivered to me yesterday." No name on the outside, but I don't think they wanted to hide who it came from. Andrew unfolded the letter, read the words slowly, and then again faster, his mouth tightening with each sentence. By the time he reached the end, his face had flushed a deep shade of crimson. They had no right to send this, he said, voice shaking slightly. No right at all. She crossed her arms. Did you tell them about us? He looked up. I didn't hide it. My mother asked if someone had been helping me outside of physical therapy. I told her you were a big part of my recovery, that we were close. I didn't think that would turn into this. Danielle leaned back against the wall, her voice low. They called me inappropriate, damaging, like I snuck into your life with a plan. They don't know you, he snapped. They don't want to, she replied. Andrew stepped closer. I do. That's not enough, she said, her voice soft but sharp. Because they're not just your family, Andrew. They're your name, your inheritance. They're your home, your safety net, everything you go back to when life gets hard. And I need to know if I fit into that. He reached out, took her hands gently. I don't care about their money, Danielle. You don't have to care about the money, she said. But they do. And when people like that care about something, they'll do anything to protect it. Even if it means hurting people who never asked to be part of the game. Andrew was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a quiet conviction, he said, I'll talk to them. Properly. In person. I won't let them do this. You deserve better than secret letters and veiled threats. Danielle nodded slowly. You're going to have to choose at some point. Maybe not today. Maybe not even soon. But that choice is coming. He looked her in the eyes. I already made it. That evening, Andrew visited his parents' estate. A sprawling colonial home nestled beneath oaks heavy with moss. It was the kind of place that echoed with generational weight, with oil paintings above the mantel and crystal untouched in cabinets. The kind of house where silence had more power than speech. His mother greeted him in the sitting room, her pearls as perfectly aligned as the gentle fold of her linen slacks. His father sat by the fireplace, reading the paper as though the world were still made of ink and soft scorn. Andrew, his mother said, rising, offering the faintest kiss to his cheek. You look well. Thanks, he replied, still standing. I'm here to talk about Danielle. Pause. A subtle glance exchanged between husband and wife. Ah, said his father without looking up. The nurse. She's not just a nurse, Andrew said, his voice rising slightly. She's the reason I'm walking again. She's the reason I'm not bitter and broken. And she's the woman I love. His mother's face didn't change, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. We don't doubt her professionalism, she said slowly. But you must understand how complicated this looks. There are boundaries, son, between patient and caregiver, between roles, and there are perceptions. I don't care about perceptions. Well, we do, his father said at last, folding his paper with finality. You know what this family represents. You know the optics. It's not just about you. There are consequences. Andrew stepped forward. To whom? To your friends? Your golf partners? The donors to your art foundation? Andrew, his mother said more firmly now, we raised you with care, with responsibility. The family trusts you, but they won't understand this. I don't need their understanding, he said. I need their respect. And if you marry her, his father asked, will you expect us to smile in photos? To host luncheons and pretend nothing has changed? No, Andrew said. I'll expect you to meet her, learn her story, and realize she's the best thing that ever happened to me. There was no shouting, no door slamming, just silence, heavy and lingering. When Andrew left the house that night, he felt no triumph, but he felt clarity. A week later, In the middle of a warm Sunday afternoon, Danielle and Andrew sat at a quiet cafe by the water. He reached into his jacket and placed a small box between them, not flashy, not ostentatious, just elegant and sincere. "Before they can stop a wedding," he said with a crooked smile, "we should probably plan one." Danielle's breath caught, her hands trembling slightly. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure." She opened the box slowly, and inside was a ring shaped not like tradition but like intention. A ring that said, "I chose you, not the path set before me." And just as she reached out to touch it, a shadow fell over the table. She looked up to find a woman standing there, hair perfectly swept back, voice low and familiar. It was Andrew's mother. "May I sit?" she asked. Danielle blinked once, surprised not by the presence of Andrew's mother, but by the fact that the woman had come alone, unguarded, without the shield of her husband or the chilly formality of legal language. She wore a sleek cream blouse, large sunglasses resting atop her head like a crown, and a silk scarf draped over her shoulders that likely cost more than Danielle's monthly rent. Andrew stood immediately. "Mother." She nodded, calm but unreadable. "Hello, Andrew." "Danielle." Then, with a faint breath, "I won't stay long." Danielle gestured carefully to the empty chair. "You're welcome to sit." The elder Mrs. Whitmore settled herself gracefully, her knees crossed just so, her hands folded with the ease of someone born into wealth and trained not to fidget. For a long moment, she simply looked at Danielle, measured, contemplative, almost as if she were staring at a museum painting she didn't quite understand but couldn't ignore. "I imagine you were expecting lawyers or threats," she said at last. "I received the letter," Danielle replied evenly. "I was prepared for worse." A pause. A small sigh. "That letter," Mrs. Whitmore said quietly, "was not sent by me." Danielle and Andrew exchanged a quick glance. "I don't understand," Andrew said. "I've spent the last week in battle with your father about this," she continued. "He acted without my knowledge. When I read it after the fact, I was appalled. Not because I was thrilled by your choice, Andrew," she added carefully, "but because what he did was beneath what I believe this family should stand for." Danielle's tone was steady. "And what do you believe this family stands for?" Mrs. Whitmore looked directly at her. "Tradition, discretion, legacy, but also dignity, which includes not humiliating the woman your son loves because of where she works or how you met." The words hung between them, delicate but piercing. Andrew exhaled. "So, you're not here to stop us?" "No," she said, her gaze shifting briefly to him. "I'm here to ask a question I should have asked much earlier." She turned to Danielle, voice lower now. "What do you love about my son?" Danielle didn't hesitate. "He listens. Not just to words, but to silence. He remembers small things like how I take my coffee, or the stories I told him when he was still recovering and couldn't sleep. He tells the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And he makes me feel like the best version of myself. Not because he puts me on a pedestal, but because he meets me where I stand." Mrs. Whitmore blinked slowly, then nodded. "I can't undo what my husband did," she said. "And I can't promise that the rest of the family will welcome you with open arms. But I will. That much I can promise." Andrew's hand reached across the table and found Danielle's. "Thank you," Danielle said softly. "I'd also like to help with the wedding," Mrs. Whitmore added. "If you'll let me." Danielle smiled gently. "Let's see how the first meeting goes, before we talk about flowers and centerpieces." That earned the smallest laugh. "Fair." In the weeks that followed, wedding planning took over their lives like a slow-moving hurricane. Small at first, just ideas and phone calls, but then faster, louder, and impossible to ignore. Venues were toured, cakes sampled, guest lists debated. Danielle, who had never envisioned herself in white or imagined her name in cursive on embossed invitations, found herself staring at swatch books and veils and wondering, often with amusement, how something so beautiful could also be so chaotic. But not all moments were light. When they met with the Whitmore family's estate attorney to finalize the prenup, something Danielle neither requested nor opposed, Andrew's father was there. He sat stiffly, arms folded, as the lawyer explained the terms. Danielle kept her voice calm. "I don't want Andrew's money. I never did." "I know," the elder Whitmore replied coldly. "But love fades. Contracts remain." Andrew's jaw tightened, but Danielle gently touched his wrist. "We'll sign what's necessary," she said. "But please don't confuse my presence here with greed. I have my own life, my own name, and whether I take yours or not, I'm not here to inherit anything. I'm here because I love your son." The lawyer, wisely, kept his eyes on the paper. When the meeting ended and the papers were signed, Andrew pulled Danielle aside. "I'm sorry you had to sit through that." "I've sat through worse," she said with a faint smile. "But I'd like to request that your father not give a toast." Andrew laughed, tension breaking. 2 months before the wedding, Danielle's younger brother, Marcus, arrived in Charleston for a long weekend. A mechanical engineer in Seattle, Marcus had always been the protective one, even when Danielle didn't need protecting. He was sharp, deeply loyal, and notoriously suspicious of anyone who came too close to his sister. They met for dinner, just the two of them, on a rooftop overlooking the harbor. "So this is serious?" Marcus asked, sipping a dark red ale. "I'm getting married, Marcus. To the guy who used to be your patient." "Yes. You don't see how that might raise an eyebrow or two?" "I raised both of mine when I got that letter from his family," she said. "So I'm good." Marcus tilted his head. "He's not like Dad. Not a project." Danielle grew quiet for a moment. "No, he's a partner." That word hung in the air. Marcus nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there. Suit, speech, awkward dance and all." She smiled. "Thanks, baby brother." He raised his glass. "To the weirdest love story I've heard in years." A week later, Danielle stood alone in the bridal boutique, waiting for the consultant to return. She wandered toward the back corner, where older gowns hung on clearance racks. There, hidden behind layers of tulle and satin, she found a simple dress, ivory, with a neckline that made her feel elegant rather than ornamental. She tried it on, and for the first time she saw a bride. Not someone playing dress-up, not someone proving a point, but a woman choosing to love and to be loved on her own terms. She turned slowly in the mirror, the soft fabric falling perfectly around her hips, the light catching her skin like a benediction. And in the reflection, she imagined Andrew smiling at her. Not as a patient, not as a miracle, but as a man who had seen her completely and loved every piece. The sky on the morning of the wedding was soft and pale, the kind of blue you almost don't notice at first, gentle, calming, touched by a whisper of white clouds moving like thoughts across the horizon. The coastal air wrapped itself around Charleston's historic district like a blessing, and the old brick church where Danielle and Andrew had chosen to say their vows stood bathed in morning light, its tall windows catching the sun as if even the building knew something sacred was about to take place. Inside, the floral arrangements had been placed precisely. Ivory roses, eucalyptus, and hints of lavender, arranged by Danielle's neighbor, Mrs. Eubanks, who'd refused to let no fancy florist take over a moment this special. In the back rooms, laughter bubbled like soft champagne. Danielle's cousin Risa was struggling to fix a hairpiece, while Marcus practiced his speech under his breath, pacing, muttering, smiling. Danielle stood in front of a tall mirror, her hands resting on her abdomen, trying to still the fluttering there. It wasn't nerves. Not really. It was more like awe. She had walked so many hospital corridors, seen so many people in pain and recovery, that she had come to believe life's greatest moments were the quiet ones. And yet here she was, in a fitted gown that hugged her like a memory, about to walk toward a man who had turned survival into love, and love into something steady. "Ready," Risa whispered, peeking in. Danielle exhaled. "Let's do this." In the pews, the guests slowly settled, family, colleagues, friends from every corner of their lives. Some from Andrew's World War pearl cufflinks and subtle watches. Others, like Danielle's community from the hospital and her neighborhood, filled the church with warmth, joy, and the kind of energy that couldn't be bought but only earned. The Whitmores arrived late, though not rudely so. Mrs. Whitmore wore a tasteful lavender dress and sat in the second row, a small smile on her face, her posture composed. Her husband, rigid as ever, remained silent but present, a small concession in itself. As the music swelled, something soft and stringed and timeless, Andrew stood at the altar in a tailored gray suit, not extravagant but elegant, the boutonniere on his chest chosen by Danielle herself. He looked down the aisle, hands folded tightly, breath caught in his throat. Then the doors opened, and there she was. Danielle walked slowly, her steps measured but unshaken, a soft glow in her eyes, the veil whispering against her cheeks. No embellishment could outshine the calm strength in her expression, the grace with which she moved. She looked directly at Andrew, and in that moment, every seat and every glance and every shadow seemed to fall away. But just as she reached the halfway point down the aisle, just as the room leaned into breathless silence, there was a stir at the back. A door opened. A figure entered. A young woman, early 20s, in a pale blue dress not suited for a wedding, stood just inside the doorway. Her face was flushed from haste, and in her hand, she held an envelope. Danielle paused slightly. Andrew's head turned. The pastor looked confused. The girl spoke, voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "I'm sorry. I didn't come to ruin anything. She held up the envelope. "I need to speak with Andrew. Before this happens." A gasp rustled through the guests. Mrs. Whitmore turned sharply, already rising. The girl stepped forward again, her voice rising above the murmurs. "My name is Sarah Wallace. I'm not here to stop this, I swear. But you need to know something before you say, 'I do.'" Andrew's brows furrowed. "Sarah?" Danielle's expression remained calm, but her hands gripped the bouquet a little tighter. She took one more step and stopped beside Marcus, who stood, instinctively protective. "Let her speak," Danielle said quietly. Sarah swallowed hard. "I used to work for your family, in the Whitmore Foundation's research department. 2 years ago, I filed a formal report about a cover-up. About manipulated numbers in one of the reports your father used to secure funding." He silenced it. Mrs. Whitmore gasped. "That's not appropriate." "No, it's relevant," Sarah interrupted, "because I found out something else. About Danielle." Now, the room was entirely still. Danielle narrowed her eyes. "What about me?" Sarah stepped forward carefully, hands trembling. "When your application to nursing school was flagged for review and nearly denied, it wasn't because of your grades. It was because someone anonymously contacted the admissions board with false allegations about academic dishonesty. I don't know how I stumbled on it, but I found an internal memo, and the email account was traced to someone connected to the Whitmore family office." Danielle stood still, unmoving, like stone wrapped in silk. Andrew looked to his father, who said nothing. Nothing at all. That silence was everything. Danielle stepped forward. "So before I ever met him, someone tried to keep me out of the spaces I worked to earn my way into?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I'm sorry. I thought you should know. And I had to say it while people were listening." Danielle nodded. "Thank you." Sarah turned to go, but Andrew stepped off the altar. "Wait." He walked to his father, who still had not stood, his face as pale as the church's marble columns. "Is it true?" Andrew asked, voice tight. Did you try to sabotage her future before you ever met her? Still no answer. Answer me, he said, louder now. His father's jaw clenched. I did what I believed was necessary for the family's reputation. That, finally, was his confession. Andrew nodded once, then turned back toward Danielle, who stood at the altar, veil pulled back now, a quiet storm behind her eyes. He walked to her, gently took her hands. If you want to walk away from all this, he whispered, I'll understand. Danielle looked up at him for a long, breathless moment. And then she said, clearly and with steady fire, why would I walk away now? I already survived them once. He smiled, his first full, unguarded smile of the day, and whispered, then let's finish what we started. The ceremony resumed. But now it was different. Now it wasn't just about love. It was about choosing truth over comfort, courage over silence, and grace over inheritance. Danielle Ayres became Danielle Whitmore that day, not because she needed a new name, but because she had earned a new chapter. And this time, nothing would silence her again. The reception was held under a canopy of soft white lights strung between oak trees, where the warm evening breeze carried the scent of salt from the nearby harbor and the sound of clinking glasses mixed with gentle jazz humming from the live quartet. There was laughter, real laughter, rising not just from polite guests but from people who had felt something that day. Danielle and Andrew weren't just a bride and groom. They were survivors, storytellers, bridges between worlds that had once seemed impossible to unite. Danielle moved through the crowd like a woman no longer proving anything, no longer shrinking herself for anyone's comfort. Her dress still shimmered slightly as she walked, but now it was her presence, her confidence, her grace, that turned heads. Andrew never let his hand fall too far from hers, and every glance between them felt like a private vow written in the air between smiles. At one point, as the dance floor swayed with family and friends, Danielle found herself standing beside Mrs. Whitmore, the two women watching Andrew laugh with Marcus as they stumbled through a dance neither had rehearsed. He's happier than I've seen him in years, Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice low, almost fragile. Danielle didn't look away. He should be. Pause. I fought this, Mrs. Whitmore added more honestly now. I fought you. Not because you weren't enough, but because I feared what it would mean to admit that the world I built doesn't fit the people my son loves. Danielle turned to her slowly. The world doesn't have to stay the same. It's allowed to grow. Mrs. Whitmore gave the smallest nod. Teach me how. Danielle smiled. We'll start with dessert. 2 weeks later, Danielle stood in front of a packed auditorium at the Charleston Health Equity Conference. She had been asked to speak, not as a nurse, not as a new bride, but as a woman who had navigated healing and injustice and somehow walked through both with her head high. Her speech was simple but searing. I was once told I didn't belong, she said from the stage, her voice clear and unshaking, that my presence would damage reputations, ruin legacies, tarnish names older than mine. But I'm here to tell you that legacy means nothing if it isn't rooted in truth. And reputation means even less if it's used to silence the people who are trying to change the world for the better. In the front row, Andrew sat, beaming. I didn't marry into wealth, she continued. I married into a moment where love challenged structure, where healing broke tradition, where someone believed I was more than what they saw in a chart or a resume. The audience stood by the end, not because the speech was dramatic, but because it was true. In the years that followed, Danielle and Andrew launched a foundation, the Ayres Whitmore Initiative, focused on equity in healthcare access and career development for marginalized youth. Danielle returned to the hospital not just as a nurse but as a speaker, a mentor, and eventually a hospital board member. She wore her badge with pride. She still walked the halls with quiet grace. But now the younger nurses followed her with respect not just for her knowledge, but for her voice. And every year on their anniversary they returned to the same little church, just the two of them, sitting in the pews where it all began. No guests, no music, just hands clasped, heads bowed. They didn't need to repeat their vows. They lived them,